And the gospel reading this morning is from Matthew chapter 15, verses 21 to 28. And hear the word of God. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering horribly from demon possession." Jesus did not answer a word, so his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." He answered, "I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." The woman then came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said. He replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Yes, Lord," she said, "but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." And Jesus answered, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed from that very same hour. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You know, it's a real pleasure to be here at Calvary again. I haven't been here for a long time. First time I was here was back in 1981, when I was the interim pastor here for a year, right when Bill Bowers left, and that's one of the happiest years of my life, at least with church work. And my daughter, who's Sandy, who's 35 now, was 2 years old when we were here. So it's been a long time, and Calvary still feels like home. So thank you for having me this morning. Now, people have been asking me a little bit about what I'm up to, and of course, you know, I sort of officially retired from Meeting Ground, but you know, we had a problem with Clairvaux Farm needing to close, but we gathered another group together to reopen Clairvaux Farm, which we've called Deep Roots. So there's two ministries there now: Deep Roots at Clairvaux Farm, Clairvaux Farm being a shelter for homeless families as it has been for the past 30 years. And Meeting Ground, of course, continues this wonderful ministry. So your support of both has been strong, continuous, and remains deeply appreciated. And it is, you know, I thank you for the encouragement it brings, because when you do mission work, you can do without money sometimes, but you need encouragement always. And Calvary's always provided that in abundance. But now for Meeting Ground, and now for Deep Roots at Clairvaux Farm, always there. I guess I wanted to say thank you for who you are. Thank you for who you are. But at any rate, we all know the name Robert Bruce. Presbyterians know the great Scotsman Robert Bruce, the great leader of the Scots. He was a great leader because he led the Scots in a time of turmoil, when, of course, they were trying to separate and get their independence from England. The English weren't happy about this, of course, and they had to fight for it. The English were very powerful, and remember, the Scots were losing. And Robert Bruce, who was the leader of his people, leader of the Scots, found himself in exile in his own country. In fact, he had to flee Scotland. He was living on an island, Rathlin Island in Ireland, off the coast of Ireland. And very discouraged because everything he had tried had failed. The English were about to win, and Scotland would no longer be an independent country. So he was feeling sorry for himself, mainly because he was alone. He was an outcast in his own land, and he felt like he was a total failure. Now, none of us have ever felt like that, but he felt like that. An outcast, a failure, and alone. We all know the story that I'm going to tell. We all know this next simple story. He was in a dark, sort of a slimy, sort of a barn-like room with rafters on the ceilings, and hiding in Ireland on that island, Rathlin Island. And he watched a spider building a web, making a web between two rafters on the ceiling. And the spider tried and failed. It was too much of a job. He looked and watched and was amazed to see the spider try again and failed again. He watched that 6 times. The spider tried and failed, tried and failed. Now, as the story goes, we don't know if it was the 7th time or whether it was the 8th time. But the spider succeeded, built the web. And before that happened, Robert Bruce said to himself, if that spider succeeds after failing so many times, if he still has the heart to go on, then I will continue. And he did. And the Scots, under Robert Bruce, were victorious in their efforts to retain their independence from England. Now, the key to that is the spiritual power of that spider. This is kind of burning. I don't know why. I have to stand away. Can you still hear me in the back? If I stand away? Okay. This is kind of a silly question, because if you couldn't hear me, why ask it? The spiritual lesson from the spider is persistence, is it not? In Islam, in the Muslim faith, there's a word for that. It's called jihad. We've all heard that word lately. It's sometimes translated as holy war. But the word jihad in Arabic really means persistence. At the heart of their faith, and at the heart of Christianity, is that great spiritual principle of persistence. And Robert Bruce had to learn it from a spider. Because even in nature, it's an important quality. So I'm going to speak a little bit about that as the theme this morning. 2 very interesting passages here. The first from Isaiah 56 and the second from Matthew 15. And I wish I could talk for hours about each one. They happen to be the lectionary readings for this week, but if I hadn't been required, I would have picked them, I think. The passage from Isaiah is revolutionary. It's an absolutely pivotal passage, and even Jesus pointed that out, and I'll say why in a minute. He is talking about 2 groups of people that were historically considered outcasts by the nation of Israel. Isaiah was singling out foreigners and eunuchs and talking about them both in a most amazing way, in a way that was considered, I would say, prophetic. Now, first, I'll describe the foreigners. We all know what foreigners are. They're people that are not Presbyterians. No, not like us. Foreigners, we all know. People of other countries. Sometimes we can't always define them, but we know them when we see them, right? They speak other languages, and we consider them foreigners. In our present world today, less and less we use that term, but in the time of Israel, under Isaiah, when it was a nation, to be a foreigner meant to be not really welcome. Now, the nation did not prohibit foreigners. They did not totally exclude them, but in general, they didn't want them. We remember in the book of Ruth. Now, Ruth was a foreigner who was welcomed into the nation, into the people of Israel. And Rahab was a prostitute who was a foreigner, and she was welcomed into the nation of Israel. In fact, both Ruth and Rahab became ancestors of Jesus himself. They were in the bloodline of Jesus himself because they married into the nation of Israel. So foreigners were not completely excluded, but you remember what the Israelites did to the Philistines and others. They went to war with them. Sometimes those wars were wars of almost complete extermination, and foreign influence was forbidden. So that's the characteristic of a foreigner at that time. Foreigners were, though, permitted some entry into the nation. Eunuchs were permitted none. Now, I don't want to say a lot about a eunuch. They were surgically mutilated males. They were basically served in the court. They were functionaries in the court of the potentate, a Persian potentate, Babylonian king. They would serve as functionaries. And so they were surgically mutilated to make them kind of harmless to the king's harem. And the Jews considered this, the Hebrews considered this anathema. They considered this a terrible practice. In Deuteronomy 23:1 we read this. Deuteronomy 23:1 absolutely says, eunuchs shall not be admitted to the assembly of the Lord. Shall not be admitted. Now foreigners, we remember, were admitted under special circumstances. Eunuchs were never admitted. And that was by biblical prohibition. Book of Deuteronomy 23:1. Eunuchs will not be permitted into the assembly of the Lord. All that by background. Now, in 1871, there was an archaeological excavation in the old temple in Jerusalem. The tablet that was excavated was expected, because the Jewish historian Josephus had written that such a tablet existed. They were surprised when they saw it, though, because they thought it was only written in Greek, but it was written in Latin and Greek. Now, this was for the Hebrew temple, a plaque not written in Hebrew, but written in Greek and Latin. And when they unearthed it in 1871 and read it, this is what it said. No foreigner is to go beyond the balustrade in the plaza of this temple zone. Whoever is caught doing so will have himself to blame, for death will follow. You see a sign that says stop, and you stop because if you don't, you'll get a ticket. And we don't want to pay the ticket of whatever it is, $100, because we missed a stop sign. But I guarantee you, if the sign read, and death will follow, if you go through the stop sign, we would stop every time. Where was this plaque? Where they unearthed it archaeologically, it was in the temple area. Where was it? It was in the temple. Now the temple, the Jewish temple, the worship of God, looked like a dartboard. It was arranged like a dartboard, with circles and a bullseye in the middle. The largest circle on the outside, the biggest circle, was the court of the Gentiles. This was a place in the temple where even Gentiles could go. Anyone could go, non-Jews, foreigners, anybody. Beneath that was the next biggest circle toward the bullseye was the court of women. And that was where only Jewish women could go, as well as men, but no foreigner could go there. And they had gradually exclusive circles. The next circle was all Jewish men could go, but no women, just men, just Jewish men. And the final middle of the temple, the bullseye area in the middle, was very exclusive. Only the high priest could go there, and only at one time of the year, because that was the place where the holiest of holies, the Ark of the Covenant, was kept. That was the very dwelling place of God and very exclusive area. Now, when I use the word exclusive, I say that applies to the temple. It was exclusive. It was an exclusive place. Who was most excluded? That's a sign, isn't it? You could just have a clock with an alarm on it, I'll quit. Who was most excluded? Foreigners. Who was completely excluded? Eunuchs. Deuteronomy 23:1, remember, no eunuch, no surgically altered man can enter into the temple at all. No, we don't permit it. Foreigners are permitted only in the outer circle, of the outer place of the temple, which was the widest circle. And the sign was placed there, if they dared enter any place else. The sign says, if you go beyond this place, you foreigner, it was written in Greek and Latin, not Hebrew, so the foreigners could read it. The Romans and the Greeks could read it. If you go past this place, we will kill you. That was an exclusive place, the temple. That was an exclusive club. Now, all of that by background. All of that by background. To say that Isaiah says, guess what? In the house of God, I promise you, the Lord means it this way, everyone will be welcome. Let no foreigner say, I am not welcome. They will be welcome in the temple of God. Let no eunuch ever say, I am unwelcome, or I'm like a dry tree, because you will be given a name. You will be not only led into the temple, but your name will be placed there. You'll be given a new name. You will be included. You will not be excluded. You will be there. That's the prophecy of Isaiah in Isaiah 56. That was what's so beautiful about him. He was years ahead of his time. And why is Isaiah 56 especially important? Because Jesus pointed it out. Jesus pointed out that it was especially important. Do you remember when he cleansed the temple with the scourge of the whips? And he said, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of thieves. Do you remember that? Well, he was quoting from Isaiah 56, what we read this morning. And he was angry that the temple was still such an exclusive place. When he said it was a den of thieves, a robber's cave is a place where who is permitted? Who is permitted in a robber's cave? You or I? Doubtful. Only robbers. Very exclusive. Jesus said, you've made the temple a robber's cave. Too exclusive. It's too exclusive. My house, he said, my house will be called a house of prayer for the people of all nations. Foreigners, eunuchs, they are welcome in my house. No more of this exclusive stuff. No more of it. No more saying people are not worthy. Now I tell you, I am here for everyone, all of us. There are no outcasts. Now moving to the New Testament. The Canaanites were a people. If I speak nicely to it. The Canaanites were a people who were very famous in the ancient world, and we know about them by proxy. The origin of the Canaanite people, they were living in that area which we call Palestine well before the Hebrews got there. The Canaanites were also the Phoenicians. If I mention the name Phoenician people, that will ring a bell to some of you. The Phoenicians were a seafaring people, and they were known, their name, by the way, the root of that word, Phoenicia, means literally purple. They were a seafaring people who had a monopoly on the color purple in the ancient world. Before we had modern dyes in which purple is a common color, in the ancient world, purple was the rarest of colors. The reason being that they couldn't make it. They didn't have artificial dyes. They couldn't make it except from the gland of a mollusk, a certain mollusk, a small piece of gland, secretion of the gland of this mollusk who lived just off the coast of Palestine in that one area. And that mollusk was farmed by the Phoenicians. They farmed it. And from each mollusk, they got a little tiny bit of the substance, which was the basis of the purple dye they produced. So when you see the Roman emperor, for instance, wearing a purple robe, that was a sign not only of rare royalty, but of richness, because purple was something reserved only for the very rich and only for the royal. And the Phoenicians, who literally mean the purple people, were the people that excavated purple. They were also a seafaring nation, and their capital was the town of Byblos. And if you can guess, we get our word Bible from their town, because the Phoenicians were the first state to have an official alphabet. They developed writing. The Phoenicians developed writing in the ancient world. They were the first state-sanctioned alphabet. And from that word, Byblos, the common word book came into the languages of people, and we get our word Bible, which literally means book, from the Phoenicians. And that was the background of the Canaanite people. Canaanite and Phoenician, the same people. They were the Phoenician people. All of that to say, it was a Canaanite woman who was coming to Jesus. She was probably well-to-do, I imagine. I don't think there was any reason to think she was not well-to-do and socially high in her country, and she was coming to Jesus, but she wanted healing for her daughter, and she believed that Jesus could do it. Now, this encounter is what I'm going to focus on. It is one of the most remarkable encounters in the Bible, maybe in all of history. Here's what happens. She is pleading with Jesus, heal my daughter, heal my daughter. First thing that Jesus does, ignores her. Ignores her. His disciples finally come and said, Master, please pay attention to her because she is driving us crazy. She's coming out. She will not let us alone. She will not let us alone. So Jesus says to them, he's not even addressing her. This is the second rejection. First he ignores her. Then he says, I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. She is a Phoenician. She's Canaanite. I don't care how great you think those people are. I was not sent to them. I was sent only to the Hebrews, only to you. Second insult. Finally, she comes and she kneels down. Herself an act of something that even in the ancient world, you can take it today, if somebody kneels down in front of you and begs, that is persuasive. She kneels down in front of him, and Jesus further humiliates her by ignoring her at that point. And then she says, Master, he said to her, I cannot and I will not give the children's bread to the dogs. The highest insult of all. If you call a person a dog today, it is an insult. It's a high insult. In the ancient world, it was the ultimate insult, because there were not pet dogs like we have today, poodles and chihuahuas. They were street scavenging, vicious, wolf-like animals, and it was not something that you called a person. It was the highest insult. He called her a dog, and she was kneeling in front of him and begging for help for her daughter. This is Jesus. He ignores her. Finally, he says he's not going to bother with her because she's not a Hebrew. Finally, she's kneeling in front of him. He continues to ignore her. Finally, he calls her a dog and her daughter a dog. He's not going to cast my children's bread to you and your daughter and your dogs. This is Jesus. And finally, she says, but even, sir, we dogs deserve the crumbs that fall from the table, don't we? Can we not have just a crumb that falls from the table? And at that moment, Jesus says remarkably, and in Greek it's the vocative case. In Greek he addresses her in the vocative case. The vocative case is only used for exclamation. It's only used for high emphasis. It's a rare case in Greek. So it's hidden in the translation. It says he starts by saying woman when he addresses her. And that is a kind reference. He says, oh woman, oh woman. It's like he puts an exclamation point on it. He's saying, woman. There's an excitement in what Jesus is saying. Oh woman, he says. Finally, he says, I have not found such great faith. Your faith is great. He lifts her up and he heals her daughter instantly. Not only that, but he raises her up as an example to his disciples. Raises her up, heals her daughter, and says it in such a way, this great excitement that he has met someone so grand as she is. Now what in the world is happening here? What kind of an encounter is this? Well, first of all, she was a foreigner. Remember the foreigners? They were to have no place in the temple. They were to have no place in the nation. Under penalty of death, they were, like the eunuchs, excluded. Jesus was different. Now, why did he treat the woman as if she were excluded when he first met her? Well, I'm not sure I have a complete explanation to everything, but knowing Jesus, he was not interested in what we think of him. He was interested in getting to the soul of a person and bringing out the best in them. Remember when he healed people who thought they couldn't be healed? He would just tell them in a very straightforward way, stand up and walk, stand up and be healed. You can do it, even though they said they couldn't. Jesus' words were bracing, and so was the power that emanated from him just as a human being. That power that came from him, his presence was bracing. So when he denied this woman 3 times, what he was actually doing was strengthening that quality, which I said at the beginning is one of the most important spiritual qualities we can have. That is persistence. Persistence. And we all know when we're kids, it's not hard to define persistence. If at first you don't succeed, try and try again. It sounds so simple, but we as adults and even as Presbyterians, we forget it. Robert Bruce had to be reminded from a spider that how important that principle was in human affairs, in his own spiritual development, in his own spiritual walk. You can feel like giving up, Jesus said. You can feel like it, but you cannot give up. That's the one thing that's not permitted. You cannot give up. Whatever happens, however you feel, however much of a failure you think you are, remember the spider, remember the Canaanite woman. He threw everything he could at her to discourage her, to make her just walk away, and said, "I'm no dog, you're a dog," and walk away. And had she done that, her daughter would never have been healed. But Jesus points to his disciples and to us and says, this woman is an example of how you should be. Persistent, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Just keep trying. And we need to remind ourselves of this as well. There was a woman that I knew who was visiting her sister because her sister's daughter was dying of a fever. When the front door opened, this is a true story, when the front door of the house opened, the older sister who was in the house looked at her younger sister and started crying and said, "She's dying. She's dying. She's upset. She's dying. She's going to die." Her younger sisters looked at her older sister and said, "She's not going to die. She will not die." And she went up there, and they did everything they could to break that fever with the belief and faith that she wasn't going to die. And she lived. The woman who told that story to me over and over again always had tears in her eyes when she said, "My sister taught me such a lesson that day. I was so distraught, and my daughter was so sick, I was sure she was going to die. But I didn't have the faith to hold on to God in persistence and say, she will not die, and to try everything we could on the side of life." It's very reminiscent of the story here. Persistence always after what we know is in our hearts and is in the heart of God. It is so very important. Now, I'm going to draw it all together by saying that we feel alone sometimes. We feel powerless. We feel like we're outcasts. That often happens. There was a little girl who came to one of our Deep Roots events this past Easter. She was 4 years old. We'll call her Emily, not her real name. We'll call her Emily. And she was from a home which there was a lot of sadness. So she never smiled. This little girl was very insecure and very unhappy, even though she was only 4 years old. Well, she came to the Easter party we had at Clairvaux Farm that Deep Roots had, which we hid on the front lawn 400 plastic Easter eggs with candy, money, and so forth. There was so much loot out there, I was tempted to get a bag and join on. It was something. 400 eggs to get. And we told the kids, the little ones, we had guides, by the way. We didn't just send them loose, but the little 4-year-olds had guides to help them find them. But at any rate, we were out there and they were hunting for their Easter eggs. And this little girl, Emily, was out there, not smiling, but very, very intent on getting as many eggs as possible. And she had a huge grocery bag full of Easter eggs, almost as big as she was. And here she's got it and carrying it. She's carrying it around. She won't let that bag of Easter eggs go. She knows what's in them. They were very valuable to her. Well, the kids continued to play after the Easter egg hunt, and she got the line to go up the slide at Clairvaux Farm. We have a beautiful playground out there. I love that playground. And she's at the top of the slide, about to slide down, holding this huge bag of Easter eggs. She can't let it go. She needs both hands, and she's afraid to come down the slide, of course. So no one could get those eggs from her. No one could get those Easter eggs from her. Well, I'm going to tell you, I don't want to brag, I don't want to boast, but I went over to her. She very suspiciously eyed me, and I said, Emily, if you let me hold your bags while you go down the slide, I promise I won't move, and I'll give them right back to you when you get down at the bottom of the slide. You can trust me, of course. I'm a Presbyterian minister. I was honored when she was very suspicious and very slowly, with this look in her face, looked at me. She handed over the bag of Easter eggs, and I stood there motionless, not moving. She raced down the slide, came over and grabbed them back from me. That's how insecure she was. That's how insecure a person she was. She was so fearful that she would lose those things. She was so fearing that she would have nothing, they'd be taken from her, like so much else in her life had been. She's a homeless kid. She's been homeless. She's had so much taken from her. So her soul was living in that sort of fear. And the fear of being an outcast, too. She was completely alone. She didn't trust anybody. She didn't trust anybody with those Easter eggs. She was even not trusting herself She was even afraid that she'd lose them. Well, about 2 months later, we had a big picnic at the farm. We had hundreds of people come, and it was sort of a grand opening thing. And we had pony rides, we had face painting, playground, we organized games for the kids. We had loads of kids there, lots of adults, as I said, and she was there again. Somebody came by, they came by on the bus, they picked her and her siblings up, and I saw her standing in the middle of the field, not smiling, still very sort of insecure looking. And this time she was holding another bag full of prizes that she'd won with the face painting. They'd been playing some games and she'd won some small prizes. They put them in a bag for her. And she was standing in the middle of the field holding them. I wanted to announce to the kids that they were getting ready for the pony ride. So I told them, we're getting ready for the pony rides, go on over. Emily came over to me with her bag, and she gave it to me, handed it to me, and then she raced off and left me holding the bag, so to speak. Now that's a small thing. That is a small thing. And you may say that God is more interested in what's happening in the political realm than what's happening in the life of a 4-year-old girl who's filled with anxiety and fear and all that. You could say that God is more interested in what's happening in the White House or what's happening all over the world with the wars and the upheavals or whatever. You could say that, but you'd be wrong. We'd be wrong. Because God is very interested in what's happening in the heart of a 4-year-old girl who feels like she's an outcast. And somehow in the contacts we had with her, as people of faith, not me, but all of us, she slowly was finding her insecurity being healed, her fear being removed, and suddenly being a person, she could see her soul unlocking itself so that she could say, well, maybe I am welcome to be a part of the human race. Maybe I do belong here on earth. Maybe there is a place for me. Maybe I am loved. And isn't that the place where we all want and long to be? There's a verse in Acts 2:39, and I'll close with this. This is for all of us. Whoever feel we're an outcast, whoever feel we're alone, whoever feel that it's hopeless, we can't go on any longer because things have gotten hopeless for us. Acts 2:39. The promise is for you and for your children and for all who are afar off, for all whom the Lord our God will call. You who were once afar off, that's the key, have been drawn near through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. You feel like you're afar off? Well, you're not. Emily, you can't trust anyone? You can't believe you're loved? Well, you are. And for all of us, the same. It is persistence in believing that God is ever with us and that God's love is profound, life-changing, and will always be available to us no matter what. All of you, me included, who are afar off outcast. Yes, maybe that is true. Maybe we have been afar off, but we have been brought near to the heart of God, and nothing can ever separate us from that. We got to be like Robert Bruce. We can never forget that. We need to always be reminded. We can never give up. We can never give in. Persistence is at the heart of what God desires of us, always.